everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and Yu-Gi-Oh, am I right? So in case you've been living under a rock for the past couple of months, Yu-Gi-Oh is in a pretty dire state. Get it? Dire? Dire is because this is dire. The game currently faces some compounding crises, from the pro player discussion of absolutely middling prize support, which has not changed at all. We're getting another verse, to the casual player conversation of being priced out of one of the most interesting and adaptable engines in modern memory in Fiendsmith. There's all this cool stuff it does, if you're willing to take out a reverse mortgage to afford it, but the issue that all parts of the Yu-Gi-Oh community can currently coalesce around is the ban list, or lack of a ban list. Like COVID-19, ban list fever had become endemic the couple of weeks before the NAWCQ, so much so that Yu-Gi-Oh had to come out and say, no, there was not going to be a pre-Nats list. Instead, it was going to be released at the end of August, which is now. So where is it? Well, more than likely we're getting the list either sometime this week or sometime next week to go into effect the day after the World Tournament that happens on September 7th. And for the first time in a long time, Yu-Gi-Oh has been signaling it will actually be a pretty comprehensive list. See, the thing that's complicated all of these little problems that the community currently has with Yu-Gi-Oh is that the format itself is bad in a big way. From a deck that feels like it can chew through any number of interactions in Fiendsmith Snake Eye, to a number of floodgates like Skill Drain and lingering hand traps like Dimension Shifter that make the game seem unwinnable, to top decks like Tenpai that feel like you really have no input on the outcome of the game at all. People are getting fed up. And call it what you want, a lack of hype, its placement right after the NAWCQ, but under 1,000 individuals for the most recent YCS is an embarrassing number. Clearly, something has to change. So today, I'll be delivering an outline as to the potential ban list. Now, in the past, I've made these videos interesting by cramming as much as I can into the unlimited section, and to be clear, we could do that again. The huge swath of cards that could be unlimited from the limited list, or even the ban list in some cases, remains large as ever. If you want some evidence of how they would impact the game, check out the Masochist Banlist tournament playlist. But today, I just want to talk about the things that can be moved from currently playable to currently less playable. The hits. Now, unlike the Peeps Yu-Gi-Ohs of the world, this is a very small list. In my opinion, this is the minimum amount of cards that would need to be hit in order to make the format a little more interesting. I mean, the bad part is it's still a ton of cards. But before I get into them, let me talk a little bit about my philosophy for this list. I think one of the most frustrating parts of modern Yu-Gi-Oh is that a lot of the top decks do actually play on an axis that is really interesting. Snake Eye Fiendsmith, Yubel Fiendsmith, Ritual Beast, Memento. I think all these decks are cool and good, but all these decks do play tools that, while they don't impact the playability of the deck or the strength of its linear engine, does give the strategy the ability to just flex an automatic win condition against a lot of decks. Additionally, I want to prevent the exact scenario that's happened in the OCG from happening over here. The teeth were knocked out of the top two decks, and the third best deck, Tenpai, rose to the top, at which point the game became unplayable for another reason because that deck is absolutely no fun to play with or against. Basically, I want the top decks to be fun, interactive, back and forth decks with a lot of adaptability in their mainline combo, but I don't want them to have access to the tools that make non-games. So let's get into it. I think the Fiendsmith engine is really cool. I think it's awesome that almost every deck can access this backup line that's really consistent and pretty powerful. And if you've been paying attention to 10-minute testings, you know that it's responsible for a lot of decks that were not playable suddenly becoming semi-playable. Think Magical Musketeer or Valmonica or Labyrinth. However, at present, there's two things it does that are extremely frustrating. The first is makes Beatrice. So Beatrice has got to go. Decks have been breaking the rules with Beatrice forever, but now every deck can do that. From sending Angel of Blue Tears to trigger off the Lacrima to set a lingering Floodgate trap card, to getting to Engine in Fire decks by binning the card you want to reborn and then making a Promethean Princess with the Beatrice and the Sequence. The card is way too flexible and none of what it enables feels good or fair. Secondly, and I think Jesse has touched on this a fair amount, there is another rank 6 that feels unfun. DDD Wave High King Caesar is way too strong for the minimal amount of investment that you put into it. 2 special summon negates is functionally 2 negates at this point in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. And unlike similar cards where a significant amount of negates are concentrated into one body like Apollosa, there's almost no counterplay in terms of going to the battle phase because he's got a billion attack. He does feel like a card you just have to answer or you die immediately, and it's frustrating to think that every single deck just can play him. There's other cool stuff in the rank 6 pool that you theoretically could play, but all of it feels way less powerful and way less frustrating. That's all I think needs to be done to the Fiendsmith engine. I don't think like Lurie needs to be banned or anything like that, and I think the inclusion of these cards is a net good, even though they have have mostly been used for evil at present. Let's talk about the deck in which they've most been used, Snake Eye. We gotta do something. I've got 3 hits that I think make really good conceptual sense for this deck. Firstly, I think Snake Eye Ash should be banned. A lot of people have been dancing around this, talking about potentially a limit to prevent them from getting to additional copies. I think its time has come. Snake Eye Ash is everything for the deck. It's of course full combo on its own, normal summon it, grab a Poplar. It's a mechanism by which on your opponent's turn you can guarantee follow-up by getting it off of a Flamberge and then adding another Snake Eye Ash to your hand. And it means that functionally the deck doesn't have any really good choke points. Of course, people like to fire an Ash Blossom on the activation of the Snake Eye Ash, but if you can weave Oak into your lines, well, they can still get to a copy of Flamberge Dragon. Now, notably, I don't think this is sufficient to kill Snake Eyes. Poplar on its own is sort of full combo, and you'd probably go up on Snake Eye Oak if only to get monsters in the graveyard that can be reborn off Flamberge and find the Flamberge originally. It just means that suddenly Oak becomes this really valuable piece of real estate, and popping it or negating its effect to summon really matters. Secondly, I think we gotta limit diaBellstar. I'm not a huge fan of how Master Duel has dealt with this deck. I think the wanted resource loop is actually really cool and interesting and important, and I think one diaBellstar is the way to go. The reason for this is it makes wanted functionally a choke point. Unless they've hard opened the one of diaBellstar, you can just Ash it and cut them off of that part of their engine. Additionally, it means a diaBellstar that's in the graveyard can now be bestialed in order to cut a follow-up wanted off. And I like that she feels special. It feels weird that there's 3 of her and one of the search target. Finally, the third hit, which I am classifying as a Snake Eye hit, is Apollousa. Apollousa features as part of the end board of pretty much every Snake Eye build, and it's not hard to see why. It's a card that puts your opponent in a position where they really can't do anything about the rest of your setup before they chew through a couple of negates, or it forces an early battle which your opponent can capitalize on by waiting on the Masquerena summon. Konami's done a really good job of late of getting rid of the annoying ass ever-present Omni negates in the extra deck, and the last piece of generic negation that I think needs to be dealt with is this card specifically. Once it's gone, the remainder of the stuff in the extra deck requires you to jump through some pretty intense hoops, or the negates are a little too targeted to matter, but everyone's activating monster effects. I think its time has come. I don't think a lot needs to be done about Yubel. Depending on who you ask or what tournament you go to, it's anywhere from the 2nd to the 4th best deck in the metagame, and I think it's fine. It's cool. It has a resource loop that, if nothing else, is a little innovative. I think the things that push it over the edge are the things that push all Fiendsmith decks over the edge, Wave Hiking Caesar and Beatrice, but still I think I'd like to see at least one change to the strategy, namely moving Soul of Yubel to 1. It's weird that you can do this 3 times, right? Like, it just doesn't feel right. I think the singular copy should feel special and not like an afterthought to churn away stuff from the graveyard back into the deck at the end of your turn. Let's talk about Tenpai. Tenpai is a really frustrating deck to play around, and it's also a really frustrating deck to ban around. Like, all the cards just came out. That said, there's a couple of outliers that I think they can easily hit. The first of which is Sangen Summoning, which I would like banned. I just hate these field spells that make your whole field a towers. Why are they printing them? The fact that this is a Rhoda as well, and there's a million ways to get to it, makes it just so irritating. If nothing else, this encourages opponents to interact with your board, which I think would really improve how people saw this deck. Even if the deck's not the best in the metagame, psychologically it feels the worst to lose to. Additionally, this isn't exactly a Tenpai hit, but I'd like to see Dimension Shifter banned as well. We are far past the point where we can consider the graveyard anything other than a resource that all decks should have access to. Against almost every strategy, Dimension Shifter functionally reads win the game, and a lot of the counterplay to Dimension Shifter, especially in decks like Snake Eye, involves making Apollousa and hoping for the best, so if we're hitting that card, we probably have to hit the card that it is being made against. Let's do some odds and ends. Firstly, I'm so sorry to Ritual Beast. I know I just took Dimension Shifter from you, but I have to take another card. That is Arch Nemesis Protoss. I don't know why they unbanned this card. It's super easy to access. It's part of Ritual Beast's like linear game plan now. They make Infernal Flame Banshee, get this Nemesis flag, and just make a Vanities ruler. On that note, we should probably hit Arch Nemesis Eschatos as well in order to get out ahead of the next. On the subject of ridiculous bosses that should have never come back, why did Thunder Dragon Colossus return? Get Nemesis Corridor off of Nemesis flag, same deal. Next up, feels weird that we banned Sangen Summoning, a spell card that makes the entire field towers, and not the Mansion of Dreadful Dolls, which makes the entire field towers. I appreciate that Gimmick Puppet is playable, but it really sucks that it's an FTK strategy. I understand the reality of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is if you're playing a bad deck, it behooves you to prevent your opponent from getting a turn to beat your bad cards. But at the minimum, could you let people interact with it? Mansion of Dreadful Dolls just makes your entire field functionally unnegatable for the amount of time that you control Gimmick Puppets, which is so annoying. Sure, some of the effects activate in a place where they can be negated, so theoretically you can still interact with it, but I don't think we should be tolerating FTKs under any circumstances. On that note, Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity, I'm sorry, but your time has come. There are just enough decks in the metagame that can theoretically make this card that I think it's time we do what every other location did and send him out to pasture. Finally, we've got one more extra deck monster that wins the game on its own, and that is Albion beyond the Sanctifier Dragon. We could play whack-a-mole with cards that you give your opponent, but I think Master Duel has shown that people will dig deep. I think they're on Vice King Requiem now. Listen, I don't want to have to put Ra's Disciple on the list and do this every 6 months for the next 2 years. There is one card in this strategy that allows you to summon a card to your opponent's side of the field that is currently legal, and it's Albion. Get it out. And finally, let's do a bunch of trap cards that I just personally hate. Different Dimension Ground, Eradicator Epidemic Virus, and Dimensional Barrier have seen a smattering of play, as their ability to be searched off of Angel of Blue Tears and shut down an opponent's turn is pretty well known. Sure, we're getting rid of that interaction, but I don't want people to draw these cards anyway. Harpy's Featherstorm is the least fun part of a deck that functionally no one plays anymore. That said, it does read win the game, and I don't like that. Why did we put Rivalry, Anti-Spell, Gozen, and Teekboo to 1? Like, what was the point of that? They said, oh yeah, like, we understand these are a problem. We want to make it less likely for you to open them, but they're good enough that you will play them, and something like 8% of your games will just be non-games because you opened a floodgate that wins you the game immediately. What if they're a problem? Just ban them. All these cards should go to 0. Skill Drain is a 3. Why? I couldn't tell you. I think we've passed the point where Skill Drain is anything resembling reciprocal. Of course, Snake Eye has the ability to get it off the field by sending it for the cost of one of their Snake Eye monsters, but it's hardly the only deck with that capacity. Almost everything that plays Skill Drain doesn't intend to play under Skill Drain at any given point, and we're not going to ban the last 3 years of card design before we ban a card that says no one gets to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Finally, I'd like to make one more change to the limited section of the ban list, and that is taking a note from Master Duel and moving Pot of Desires, Prosperity, and Extravagance to 1. At present, these 3 cards don't see a ton of experimentation in the TCG. We just have too many playables, I think. But I do think until we move these cards to a lower number than 3, a lot of consistency hits and the like are going to feel like absolutely nothing because you just get to see so much more of your deck. What's more, maybe there's a little bit of a deck building give where you're like, oh, I could play Prosperity and Extravagance if I could jigger my extra deck in a certain way. Ooh, that might be interesting. That's something, right? Anyway, those are the minimum amount of changes I would like to see on this upcoming list. I know this makes the list much larger than pretty much any that Konami's done in years, but I do think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is at a bit of a crossroads, and I think we have a pretty good understanding of what a more limited list would look like based on an OCG format that, to my understanding, is functionally unplayable. Let me know if there's anything I missed, anything you'd like to see banned, or what you expect Konami to do. I imagine the answer to that one is nothing, or the worst possible option, or print another verse. That's it. See ya.